Summary of the Art of Thinking Clearly by Rolf Dobelli. Number 1. Survivorship bias. Why you should visit cemeteries. Definition: focusing on the winners while ignoring the many unseen losers, leading us to overestimate our chances of success. It's like noticing only the successful musicians without seeing all the ones who didn't make it. Example: only hearing success stories from startups that make it big, ignoring the vast majority that fail. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I only looking at the successes and ignoring the failures that don't make it into the spotlight? Number 2. Swimmer's body illusion. Does Harvard make you smarter? Definition: mistaking correlation for causation, thinking achieving X will result in Y. Like assuming swimming makes you have a swimmer's body, without considering innate factors. Example: believing you can get a swimmer's physique just by swimming, not considering genetic factors that may play a role. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, is this outcome really caused by the action, or am I assuming causation based on appearance? Number 3. Clustering illusion. Why you see shapes in the clouds. Definition: seeing patterns in random events, such as thinking streaks or clusters in random data, like flipping a coin, are meaningful. Example: seeing patterns in stock market movements that are actually random. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I seeing patterns where none exist because it's easier to remember or notice them? Number 4. Social proof. If 50 million people say something foolish, it is still foolish. Definition: believing something is correct or appropriate to do because others are doing it, regardless of its inherent value or truth. Example: buying a popular product because everyone else seems to have it, assuming it must be good. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I doing this because others are doing it, or because I believe it's the right choice for me? Number 5. Sunk cost fallacy. Why you should forget the past. Definition: continuing a project or endeavor as a result of previously invested resources, time, money, effort, rather than current values and potential future returns. It's like watching a bad movie till the end because you've paid for it. Example: continuing to invest in a project because you've already spent a lot and you don't want it to go to waste. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I continuing because of the time or money already invested, rather than current and future benefits? Number 6. Reciprocity. Don't accept free drinks. Definition: feeling compelled to return favors or reciprocate actions, even when unsolicited or at a personal disadvantage. Example: feeling compelled to donate to a charity because they sent you a free pen. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I feeling obliged to reciprocate a favor or gift, and is it influencing my judgment? Number 7. Confirmation bias, Part 1. Beware the special case. Definition: seeking out information that confirms our pre-existing beliefs and ignoring evidence that contradicts them. Like favoring news that supports our viewpoint while dismissing opposing perspectives. Example: only noticing information that supports your existing beliefs about health benefits of a certain diet. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I only looking for information that confirms my preconceptions and ignoring what doesn't? Number 8. Confirmation bias, Part 2. Murder your darlings. Definition: the continuation and further explanation of seeking confirmation for our beliefs, demonstrating how this bias can affect decision-making and lead to ignoring important disconfirming evidence. Example: ignoring evidence that contradicts your political views, while highlighting everything that supports them. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I being critical of my own beliefs and actively seeking out information that challenges them? Number 9. Authority bias. Leave your supermodel friends at home. Definition: the tendency to attribute greater accuracy and value to the opinions of an authority figure, regardless of the actual content or evidence supporting their claims. It's like following a leader's advice without questioning its validity. Example: following a celebrity's medical advice without questioning it, simply because they are famous. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I giving too much weight to the opinion of an authority figure in making my decision? Number 10. Contrast effect. Leave your supermodel friends at home. Definition: evaluating something not on its own merits, but in comparison with something else, often leading to distorted perceptions. Example: thinking a deal is good just because it's less expensive compared to a much higher priced option. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, is my perception influenced by comparisons rather than objective analysis? Number 11. Availability bias. Why we prefer a wrong map to no map at all. Definition: preferring information that comes to mind quickly, leading to overestimating its importance or frequency. Like thinking plane crashes are common because they're highly publicized, even though they're very rare. Example: fearing plane crashes more than car accidents because plane crashes are more prominent in the news. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I overestimating the likelihood of events based on their memorability or recent exposure? Number 12. The "it'll get worse before it gets better" fallacy. Why no pain, no gain should set alarm bells ringing. Definition: believing a situation must deteriorate before improving, often used to justify the continuation of a failing project or policy without evidence of eventual success. Example: believing that feeling worse after starting a new health regimen means it is working, without considering other causes. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I justifying continued effort because I believe things must get worse before improving? Number 13. Story bias. Even true stories are fairy tales. Definition: preferring to interpret information through narrative forms, making us more susceptible to accepting information if it fits into a coherent story, regardless of its factual accuracy. Example: believing a product will change your life dramatically, swayed by a compelling advertisement story. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I too focused on a compelling story rather than the hard facts? Number 14. Hindsight bias. Why you should keep a diary. Definition: believing in hindsight that we knew the outcome of an event was predictable, even when it wasn't, leading to an overestimation of our own ability to have predicted the event. Example: after an event occurs, believing you knew it was going to happen all along. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I falsely believing I could have predicted an event after it has already happened? Number 15. Overconfidence effect. Why you systematically overestimate your knowledge and abilities. Definition: overestimating our own abilities, knowledge, and the accuracy of our predictions, often leading to taking greater risks than is warranted. Example: thinking you can easily start a successful YouTube channel because you see others succeed without knowing their struggle. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I overestimating my own abilities or the accuracy of my predictions? Number 16. Chauffeur knowledge. Don't take news anchors seriously. Definition: possessing surface-level knowledge enough to give the impression of competence while lacking depth and understanding, similar to a chauffeur who knows the route but not the details about the destinations. Example: a TV personality discussing complex financial markets confidently, despite having only surface-level knowledge. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, do I truly understand the topic, or am I just repeating what I've heard? Number 17. Illusion of control. You control less than you think. Definition: believing we have control over outcomes that we actually cannot influence, leading to an overestimation of our ability to affect events. Example: believing you can influence the roll of dice by throwing them a certain way in a board game. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I overestimating my ability to control events? Number 18. Incentive super response tendency. Never pay your lawyer by the hour. Definition: being overly influenced by incentives, leading to behavior that might not align with overall goals or ethical standards, such as a lawyer billing more hours than necessary because they are paid by the hour. Example: working overtime consistently because of the promise of a large year-end bonus. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, is my judgment being clouded by the incentives offered? Number 19. Regression to mean. The dubious efficacy of doctors, consultants, and psychotherapists. Definition: the statistical phenomenon where extreme cases tend to be followed by more moderate ones, often misunderstood as a result of a specific action taken. Example: a below-average student scores top marks on a test and is considered a genius, only to perform average later. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I misinterpreting a return to average performance as a significant change? Number 20. Outcome bias. Never judge a decision by its outcome. Definition: judging a decision based on its outcome rather than the quality of the decision at the time it was made. Example: judging a risky financial investment as wise solely because it ended up making profit, ignoring the risk. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I judging a decision based on its outcome rather than the quality of the decision at the time? Number 21. The paradox of choice. Less is more. Definition: the phenomenon where having too many options leads to dissatisfaction and indecision, as the more choices we have, the more we feel overwhelmed and regretful about the alternatives we didn't pick. Example: feeling overwhelmed and unable to choose at a restaurant with a very large menu. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, is having too many options making it harder for me to choose and making me less satisfied with my choice? Number 22. Liking bias. You like me. You really, really like me. Definition: the tendency to agree with or believe people we like or find attractive, regardless of the evidence or their expertise on the topic. This bias explains why we're more likely to buy products endorsed by celebrities we admire. Example: buying a car from a dealer because they were friendly and personable, not because the deal was the best. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I favoring someone or something just because I like them, not because of merit? Number 23. Endowment effect. Don't cling to things. Definition: valuing things more highly simply because we own them, leading us to demand more to give up an item than we would be willing to pay to acquire it if we didn't own it. Example: valuing an old watch you own far more than its market price simply because it's yours. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, do I value something more just because I own it? Number 24. Coincidence. The inevitability of unlikely events. Definition: mistaking random events for meaningful patterns or connections because our brains are wired to look for relationships even when none exist, like thinking a dream predicted an event. Example: believing that wearing your lucky shirt helps your sports team win because they've won every time you wore it. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I reading too much into this coincidence? Number 25. Groupthink. The calamity of conformity. Definition: the practice of thinking or making decisions as a group in a way that discourages creativity or individual responsibility. This can lead to poor decisions because group members may not express their own opinions or question the consensus. Example: agreeing with a team's decision on a flawed project plan because everyone else seems to agree. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I conforming to the group's views to avoid conflict, even if I disagree? Number 26. Neglect of probability. Why you'll soon be playing megatrillions. Definition: ignoring statistical information and probabilities when making decisions, often focusing instead on emotional stories or personal experiences. This can lead to overestimating the likelihood of dramatic but rare events and underestimating more common risks. Example: worrying about a terrorist attack on your flight more than the drive to the airport, which is statistically riskier. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I ignoring the actual probability of outcomes in my decision-making? Number 27. Scarcity error. Why the last cookie in the jar makes your mouth water. Definition: overvaluing resources or opportunities because they are limited, leading to irrational decision-making. This is often seen in sales tactics like limited time offer or while supplies last, making us feel a sense of urgency and scarcity. Example: rushing to buy a limited edition sneaker, not because you need it, but because it's scarce. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I overvaluing something just because it's scarce or hard to get? Number 28. Base rate neglect. When you hear hoofbeats, don't expect a zebra. Definition: ignoring or undervaluing general information in favor of specific information, even when the general information is more relevant to the decision. Example: fearing shark attacks while swimming in the ocean, despite the extremely low odds of an attack. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I ignoring general information in favor of specific but irrelevant details? Number 29. Gambler's fallacy. Why the balancing force of the universe is baloney. Definition: the belief that if something happens more frequently than normal during a given period, it will happen less frequently in the future, or vice versa. Example: believing a coin is due to land on heads after flipping tails 5 times in a row. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I wrongly assuming that past events will affect future probabilities? Number 30. The anchor. Why the wheel of fortune makes our heads spin. Definition: the tendency to rely too heavily on the first piece of information offered, the anchor, when making decisions, even if it is irrelevant. Example: being swayed by the initial price of a car at $30,000 and thinking $25,000 is a bargain without comparing other deals. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I overly influenced by the first piece of information, anchor, I received? Number 31. Induction. How to relieve people of their millions. Definition: the assumption that what happened in the past will happen again in the future, leading to overconfidence in certain patterns or trends. Example: assuming all swans are white because every swan you've ever seen is white. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I assuming that what happened in the past will happen again in the same way? Number 32. Loss aversion. Why evil strikes harder than good. Definition: the tendency to prefer avoiding losses over acquiring equivalent gains. It is the feeling that losing $100 is more painful than the joy of gaining $100. This can lead us to make decisions that are too cautious or to stick with a known disadvantage rather than opting for a potentially greater benefit. Example: refusing to sell a stock at a loss, preferring to hold on to it and risk greater losses. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I more concerned about avoiding losses than achieving gains? Number 33. Social loafing. Why teams are lazy. Definition: the phenomenon where individuals exert less effort to achieve a goal when they work in a group than when they work alone. Example: in a group project, relying on others to do most of the work because you think your contribution won't be noticed. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I contributing less effort to a group task because I assume others will pick up the slack? Number 34. Exponential growth. Stumped by a sheet of paper. Definition: the process by which a quantity grows exponentially, increases by doubling, for instance, rather than linearly, increasing by a fixed amount each time. Example: being surprised when a video goes from 100 to 1 million views overnight, underestimating viral growth. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I underestimating how quickly something can grow or escalate over time? Number 35. Winner's curse. Curb your enthusiasm. Definition: occurs in auctions or competitive bidding situations, where the winner tends to overpay due to emotional involvement or competition, leading to regret. This can also apply to situations where getting what you want at a high cost doesn't bring the expected level of happiness or utility. Example: overbidding in an auction for a vintage car and later realizing you paid much more than its value. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I overvaluing a one auction or competition, not considering the price I paid may be too high? Number 36. Fundamental attribution error. Never ask a writer if the novel is autobiographical. Definition: the error of overemphasizing personal characteristics and underestimating situational factors when explaining other people's behavior. Example: blaming a colleague's missed deadline on laziness, ignoring their sick child at home. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I blaming someone's character instead of considering external factors for their actions? Number 37. False causality. Why you shouldn't believe in the stork. Definition: incorrectly assuming that because one event follows another, the first event caused the second. This is like thinking a rain dance creates rain just because rain followed the dance without considering other variables or coincidences. Example: believing that carrying an umbrella causes rain because several times you've carried it, it rained. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I incorrectly assuming one thing caused another just because they happened in sequence? Number 38. Halo effect. Everyone is beautiful at the top. Definition: the bias where our overall impression of a person, or product, or brand colors our judgment about their specific traits. Example: assuming a good-looking person is also inherently kind or intelligent. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I letting one good trait of a person or thing influence my opinion on all their other traits? Number 39. Alternative paths. Congratulations! You've won Russian roulette. Definition: overlooking alternative explanations or solutions to a problem, focusing instead on a single narrative. This can lead us to misinterpret events or data because we're too fixated on one possible explanation or course of action, ignoring others that might be more plausible or effective. Example: thinking you would have been happier if you'd chosen a different career path, ignoring potential downsides. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I considering what could have happened instead of just focusing on what did happen? Number 40. Forecast illusion. False prophets. Definition: the belief that we can predict the future accurately, leading to overconfidence in our forecasts and plans. This illusion persists despite the historical record of predictions being frequently wrong, from weather forecasts to economic predictions, due to the complex nature of predicting future events. Example: trusting a financial expert's stock market predictions, despite their track record of inaccuracies. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I overestimating my ability to predict future events? Number 41. Conjunction fallacy. The deception of specific cases. Definition: believing that specific conditions are more probable than a single general one. Example: assuming a person who reads poetry and has a PhD is more likely to be a literature professor than a truck driver. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I assuming more specific conditions are more probable than general ones? Number 42. Framing. It's not what you say, but how you say it. Definition: the way information is presented affects our decisions and judgments. Example: being more likely to buy meat labeled 95% fat-free than 5% fat. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, how might a different presentation of this information change my decision? Number 43. Action bias. Why watching and waiting is torture. Definition: the tendency to prefer action to inaction, even when the action is not beneficial and might even be harmful. Example: feeling the need to do something in a crisis, even if action is not warranted, like trading stocks during market dips. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I doing something just to feel active, even if action might not be necessary? Number 44. Omission bias. Why you are either the solution or the problem. Definition: preferring inaction to action, based on the belief that harm caused by doing something is worse than harm caused by doing nothing, even if the outcomes are the same. Example: preferring to stay passive and not invest in the stock market for fear of making a loss, even at the expense of potential gains. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I wrongly favoring inaction over action due to the potential consequences of doing something? Number 45. Self-serving bias. Don't blame me. Definition: the habit of attributing positive outcomes to our own actions and negative outcomes to external factors. Example: taking credit for successes at work, but blaming failures on external factors like market downturns or team inefficiencies. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I attributing successes to my own abilities and failures to external factors? Number 46. Hedonic treadmill. Be careful what you wish for. Definition: the observed tendency of humans to quickly return to a relatively stable level of happiness despite major positive or negative events or life changes. This means that no matter what successes we achieve or challenges we face, our level of happiness tends to revert back to a baseline over time. Example: buying a new car, feeling happy for a few months, then returning to your baseline level of happiness. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I assuming that a change in my circumstances will have a lasting impact on my happiness? Number 47. Self-selection bias. Do not marvel at your existence. Definition: a bias that occurs when individuals select themselves into a group, causing a biased sample with non-random characteristics. Example: a survey on a health magazine's website concludes its readers are very health conscious, ignoring non-reader populations. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, is my sample biased because participants have selected themselves into the group? Number 48. Association bias. Why experience can damage our judgment. Definition: the tendency to form associations with things or people based on one or a few characteristics, leading to irrational judgments or decisions. Example: assuming someone is trustworthy because they come from the same small town as you do. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I being influenced by my associations with people or things, rather than by objective evidence? Number 49. Beginner's luck. Be wary when things get off to a great start. Definition: the supposed phenomenon that newcomers experience disproportionate frequency of success or winning in new activities. This belief can lead to unrealistic expectations for continued performance, ignoring the role of chance and the likely normalization of results over time. Example: winning a game of poker on your first try and believing you have a natural talent for it. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I mistaking initial success for sustainability without considering the role of chance? Number 50. Cognitive dissonance. Sweet little lies. Definition: the mental discomfort experienced by a person who holds two or more contradictory beliefs, ideas, or values at the same time. This might happen when we buy something expensive that doesn't meet expectations, but we convince ourselves it was a good purchase to reduce the feeling of regret. Example: feeling uncomfortable for enjoying a big, unhealthy burger when you identify as a health enthusiast. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I justifying my actions or beliefs, even when faced with conflicting evidence? Number 51. Hyperbolic discounting. Live each day as if it were your last, but only on Sundays. Definition: the tendency to prefer smaller, immediate rewards over larger, later rewards, valuing the present more than the future. Example: choosing $50 now over $100 in a year because the immediate reward is more tempting. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I overvaluing immediate rewards at the expense of long-term benefits? Number 52. Because justification. Any lame excuse. Definition: the phenomenon where providing a reason, no matter how trivial, increases compliance with requests. Example: cutting in line because you say you're in a hurry, finding people more likely to let you because you gave a reason. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I accepting a reason just because it's provided, without questioning its validity? Number 53. Decision fatigue. Decide better. Decide less. Definition: the deteriorating quality of decisions made by an individual after a long session of decision-making. Example: making poor decisions at the end of a long day of back-to-back meetings. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I making poor decisions after a long session of decision-making? Number 54. Contagion bias. Would you wear Hitler's sweater? Definition: the irrational belief that objects or individuals share properties with one another based on past contact or proximity, often leading to illogical associations of qualities or characteristics. Example: refusing to wear a sweater offered by someone you dislike, as if it carries their negative qualities. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I irrationally avoiding things because of where they've been or who has touched them? Number 55. The problem with averages. Why there is no such thing as an average war. Definition: over-reliance on average figures to describe a distribution, which can be misleading, especially when the distribution is skewed or has extreme values. Example: thinking 6 hours of sleep is enough because the average person needs 6 to 8 hours, even if you personally need 8. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I relying on averages without considering the variability within the data? Number 56. Motivation crowding. How bonuses destroy motivation. Definition: the phenomenon where external incentives like rewards or punishments can undermine intrinsic motivation. Example: losing intrinsic motivation to paint because you started selling your art, focusing instead on what sells. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I assuming external rewards or punishments are the best motivators for all actions? Number 57. Twaddle tendency. If you have nothing to say, say nothing. Definition: the tendency to focus on trivial information rather than relevant information, often leading to distraction from important tasks or decisions. Example: speaking at length without saying anything substantial, especially common in political speeches. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I talking or acting just to fill a void, even if it adds no value? Number 58. Will Rogers phenomenon. How to increase the average IQ of two states. Definition: the statistical effect where moving an element from one set to another can raise the average of both sets without any real improvement in the overall situation. Example: improving cancer survival rates by reclassifying a less severe stage as more severe without changing patient outcomes. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I improving a statistic not by making real changes, but by shifting elements between categories? Number 59. Information bias. If you have an enemy, give him information. Definition: the tendency to seek information when it does not affect action. More information is not always better, especially when it is irrelevant to the decisions at hand. Example: collecting excessive data before making a decision, like reading hundreds of reviews before buying a toaster. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, Am I seeking more information even when it won't affect action? Number 60. Effort justification. Hurt so good. Definition: the tendency to attribute a greater value to an outcome they had to put effort into achieving, leading to a rationalization of the expended effort. Example: believing a difficult-to-join club is more valuable just because you had to undergo a tough initiation process. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I valuing something more because I put a lot of effort into it, regardless of the actual outcome? Number 61. The law of small numbers. Why small things loom large. Definition: the mistaken belief that small samples closely resemble the population from which they're drawn, leading to overgeneralization from limited data. Example: concluding a new restaurant is terrible after just one meal didn't meet your expectations. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I drawing broad conclusions from a small sample of data? Number 62. Expectations. Handle with care. Definition: the belief that our future experiences or outcomes will follow what we expect, potentially skewing our perception and interaction with reality. Example: enjoying a movie less because your friends hyped it up so much beforehand. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, how might my expectations be shaping my perception or outcome? Number 63. Simple logic. Speed traps ahead. Definition: the preference for simple over complex explanations, which can lead to misunderstanding complex situations by oversimplifying them. Example: assuming someone wealthy must be intelligent or hardworking, overlooking factors like inheritance or luck. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I oversimplifying complex issues with straightforward logic? Number 64. Forer effect. How to expose a charlatan. Definition: the tendency for individuals to believe vague, general statements to be highly accurate for them personally, often exploited in horoscopes and fortune-telling. Example: believing a generic horoscope description is highly specific to you because it vaguely matches your personality. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, could this seemingly personalized information actually apply broadly to many people? Number 65. Volunteer's folly. Volunteer work is for the birds. Definition: the undervaluation of one's own time or effort when volunteering, assuming that the cause justifies the personal cost without proper consideration of value. Example: spending hours on a task for a friend, like moving furniture, which you wouldn't do for yourself or for pay. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I underestimating the effort or resources needed for this volunteer activity? Number 66. Affect heuristic. Why you are a slave to your emotions. Definition: the process of making decisions based on emotions and feelings rather than logical analysis. Example: making a snap judgment about someone's character based on a single action they take, like giving up their seat on a bus. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, are my feelings about an unrelated matter influencing my judgment on this one? Number 67. Introspection illusion. Be your own heretic. Definition: the belief that we understand our own internal states better than we do, leading to overconfidence in our explanations of our behavior. Example: overestimating your understanding of your own motivations and behaviors. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I overestimating my ability to understand my own motives and behaviors? Number 68. Inability to close doors. Why you should set fire to your ships. Definition: the difficulty in abandoning options or paths once they are available, even when they no longer serve our best interests. Example: keeping unnecessary belongings because you might need them someday, making your home cluttered. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I keeping too many options open at the expense of focusing on what truly matters? Number 69. Neomania. Disregard the brand new. Definition: The obsession with novelty, preferring what is new over what is tried and true, sometimes to one's detriment. Example: preferring to buy the latest smartphone model each year, regardless of whether you need the new features. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I overvaluing something just because it's new and undervaluing older alternatives? Number 70. Sleeper effect. Why propaganda works. Definition: the delayed impact of a message, where an initially discounted message becomes more persuasive over time. Example: initially dismissing a product because of a poorly executed ad, but eventually buying it as the memory of the ad fades. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I changing my opinion based on the source of the information, forgetting its initial context over time? Number 71. Alternative blindness. Why it's never just a two-horse race. Definition: the failure to consider all alternatives when making a decision, leading to potentially poorer choices. Example: focusing solely on 2 job offers and overlooking the possibility of finding a better opportunity elsewhere. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I failing to consider all the alternative options when making a decision? Number 72. Social comparison bias. Why we take aim at young guns. Definition: the tendency to evaluate oneself by comparing with others, often leading to feelings of superiority or inferiority. Example: feeling inadequate after scrolling through social media profiles of friends who seem to have more successful careers. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I judging myself based on how I compare to others rather than on my own criteria for success? Number 73. Primacy and recency effects. Why first impressions deceive. Definition: the tendency to remember the first and last items in a series best, and the middle items worst. Example: remembering only the first and last items from a list you're told, forgetting everything in the middle. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I letting my first or last impressions unduly influence my overall view? Number 74. Not invented here syndrome. Why you can't beat homemade. Definition: the preference for internal solutions over external ones, simply because they were developed within the group or organization, regardless of their merit. Example: rejecting a superior software solution because your company didn't develop it internally. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I dismissing a good idea or solution simply because it comes from outside my group? Number 75. The black swan. How to profit from the implausible. Definition: the impact of highly improbable and unpredictable events that have massive consequences, often rationalized in hindsight as predictable. Example: being completely unprepared for a global pandemic because you assumed such an event was too unlikely to consider seriously. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I underestimating the impact of rare and unpredictable events? Number 76. Domain dependence. Knowledge is non-transferable. Definition: the inability to apply knowledge and skills from one domain to another, leading to compartmentalized expertise. Example: excelling in negotiating deals at work, but failing to negotiate a fair price on a personal car purchase. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I assuming knowledge or skills in one area automatically apply to another? Number 77. False consensus effect. The myth of like-mindedness. Definition: the tendency to overestimate how much other people agree with our own beliefs, behaviors, attitudes, and values. Example: assuming most of your colleagues share your disapproval of the new office policy. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I overestimating how much others agree with my beliefs or behaviors? Number 78. Falsification of history. You were right all along. Definition: the distortion of the past to fit with present beliefs, often to make one's actions seem more reasonable or justifiable in hindsight. Example: Believing your favorite political party has always fought for the people, ignoring past policy flaws. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I rewriting history to fit my current beliefs or understanding? Number 79. In-group, out-group bias. Why you identify with your football team. Definition: favoring members of one's own group over those in other groups, leading to prejudice and discrimination. Example: preferring a candidate in an election simply because they are from your hometown. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I unfairly favoring people who are part of my group over those who are not? Number 80. Ambiguity aversion. The difference between risk and uncertainty. Definition: the preference for known risks over unknown risks, leading to avoidance of uncertain options even when they may be beneficial. Example: choosing a lower-paying job with a clear role over a potentially higher-paying job with undefined duties. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I avoiding options with uncertain outcomes, even when they may be the best choice? Number 81. Default effect. Why you go with the status quo. Definition: the tendency to choose the default option when faced with a choice due to inertia or the perception that the default is endorsed by the selector. Example: sticking with your electricity provider despite knowing there are cheaper options just because switching is a hassle. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I sticking with the default option out of inertia rather than making an active choice? Number 82. Fear of regret. Why last chances make you as panic. Definition: the apprehension of feeling regret in the future, leading to decision-making that aims to minimize or avoid potential regret, often causing conservative choices. Example: not selling a stock at a loss to avoid the regret of making a bad investment decision. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I making decisions based on avoiding potential regret rather than on potential gains? Number 83. Salience effect. How eye-catching details render you as blind. Definition: the tendency to focus on items or information that are more prominent or emotionally striking and ignore those that are unremarkable, even when this distinction is irrelevant to the decision at hand. Example: focusing on a vivid story of a lottery winner and deciding to buy a ticket, ignoring the statistics of winning. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I focusing too much on the most memorable or dramatic elements and ignoring the rest? Number 84. House money effect. Why money is not naked. Definition: the inclination to take greater risks when dealing with money that is perceived as being won or given rather than hard-earned. Example: betting more aggressively in a poker game with winnings, feeling it's not your own money at risk. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I more willing to take risks with money that feels like house money or a windfall? Number 85. Procrastination. Why New Year's resolutions don't work. Definition: the act of delaying or postponing tasks, often due to the irrational belief that one will be more ready, willing, or able to do them in the future. Example: delaying starting a new exercise regimen until next Monday, then finding another excuse when the time comes. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I delaying important tasks for no good reason, assuming I'll be better prepared to tackle them later? Number 86. Envy. Build your own castle. Definition: the feeling of discontent or covetousness with regard to another's advantages, success, possessions, etc., often leading to negative social comparisons. Example: feeling bitter about a friend's new high-paying job, even though it has no direct negative impact on your life. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I feeling discontented because of someone else's success or possessions? Number 87. Personification. Why you prefer novels to statistics. Definition: attributing human characteristics to non-human entities or inanimate objects, which can influence judgment and decision-making by evoking emotional responses. Example: trusting a car more after it gets you through a particularly harsh winter, as if it has a loyal personality. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I attributing human characteristics to non-human entities or events, influencing my understanding or decisions? Number 88. Illusion of attention. You have no idea what you are overlooking. Definition: the mistaken belief that we are fully aware of our surroundings and that if something important or unusual happens, it will automatically catch our attention. Example: not noticing your friend got a haircut because you were focused on telling a story during your meeting. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I assuming that I'm aware of all important information in my environment? Number 89. Strategic misrepresentation. Hot air. Definition: the deliberate distortion or exaggeration of information for strategic purposes, such as gaining advantage or persuading others. Example: exaggerating project benefits in a business proposal to ensure it gets approved. Planning to deal with the consequences later. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I exaggerating or withholding information to influence opinions or outcomes? Number 90. Overthinking. Where's the off switch? Definition: the process of thinking about something too much or for too long, making it harder to make a decision or take action, often leading to analysis paralysis. Example: spending weeks researching and comparing dozens of vacuum cleaners for features you likely won't use. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I analyzing aspects too much to the point of making decisions harder than they should be? Number 91. Planning fallacy. Why you take on too much. Definition: the tendency to underestimate the time, costs, and risks of future actions and overestimate the benefits, leading to a bias toward positive scenarios in planning. Example: underestimating how long it will take to remodel your kitchen, leading to stress and budget overruns. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I underestimating how long it will take to complete tasks despite past experience? Number 92. Deformation professionnelle. Those wielding hammers see only nails. Definition: the tendency to look at things from the point of view of one's own profession or specialization, rather than from a broader perspective, often leading to a narrow or biased view. Example: as a hammer manufacturer, seeing every problem as solvable by more nails and hammers. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, is my professional background causing me to view problems from a limited perspective? Number 93. Zeigarnik effect. Mission accomplished. Definition: the tendency to remember uncompleted tasks more easily than completed ones, theorized to be due to a form of cognitive tension similar to a cliffhanger. Example: remembering tasks you haven't finished more easily than those you have completed. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I more likely to remember tasks I haven't finished, causing unnecessary stress? Number 94. Illusion of skill. The boat matters more than the rowing. Definition: the belief that one's abilities are responsible for successful outcomes, overlooking the role of luck and external factors. Example: believing you're good at predicting stock market movements because of a few successful trades. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I overestimating my ability or the effect of my skill in situations largely influenced by chance? Number 95. Feature positive effect. Why checklists deceive you. Definition: the tendency to place greater value on what is present or easily observable, while undervaluing what is absent but possibly more important. Example: remembering only the times your intuition was correct, not the times it was wrong. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I focusing only on the presence of features rather than their absence affecting my judgment? Number 96. Cherry picking. Drawing the bullseye around the arrow. Definition: Selecting data or evidence that supports one's arguments or beliefs while ignoring data or evidence that contradicts them. Example: highlighting only the data that supports your argument in a report, ignoring any data that contradicts it. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I selectively choosing data or facts that support my viewpoint, ignoring what doesn't? Number 97. Fallacy of the single cause. The Stone Age hunt for scapegoats. Definition: attributing a particular effect to a single cause, even when many causes may interact to produce the effect. Example: blaming an economic downturn solely on one policy without considering the complex interplay of factors. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I attributing an event or situation to a single cause when it's actually more complex? Number 98. Intention to treat error. Speed demons make safe drivers. Definition: a mistake in evaluating the outcome of a study or experiment by excluding the data from participants who didn't follow the procedure exactly, potentially leading to overestimations of effectiveness or efficacy. Example: evaluating a diet's effectiveness based on all who started it, ignoring those who dropped out because they found it hard. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I evaluating the effectiveness of a strategy based on the plan rather than actual outcomes? Number 99. News illusion. Why you shouldn't read the news. Definition: the belief that exposure to news media provides a comprehensive and accurate understanding of the world, ignoring the selective and often sensational nature of news coverage, which can skew perception. Example: believing you're well-informed because you watch the news, ignoring the selective nature of news reporting. How can you avoid it? Ask yourself, am I overvaluing the information I get from the news, mistaking it for a complete picture of reality? Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and hit that subscribe button so you never miss out on future content.